A few weeks ago, I drove by a sign marking a yard sale. I always try to stop at yard sales just in case someone's selling Legos on the cheap, and I wasn't disappointed. An old Lego tub was filled with bricks spanning decades. I could see Star Wars sets, city construction vehicles, Pixar cars, a base plate I would later date back to the 70s, and these big quarter circle gray pieces. Those gray pieces really caught my eye, and after I bought the bin for $15, I laid it all out on the table and began to sort through the parts. My initial guess on the sets were mostly correct, but these quarter circles eluded me for a while. I couldn't find them on Bricklink at first. What were they called? Quarter? Dish? Thing? Finally, I caught a glimpse of the part number on the bottom of the piece. 30117. I typed that into Bricklink and got a result. 10 by 10 by 2 1/3 quarter saucer top. It appeared in 6 sets, most of them from the theme UFO. UFO? I'd never heard of this theme. It ran from 1996 to 1999, and the sets they're just cool. Look them up. These sets include a bunch of translucent pieces, a really distinct color theme, and incredible prints. And I dove into a rabbit hole. Over the next few hours, I stared at these old space sets from the 90s. You might recognize some of these names: Blacktron, Ice Planet 2002, RoboForce. I never had these sets. I pretty much got right into LEGO Star Wars as a kid and never looked back. So I have zero nostalgia on this when I say these sets are cool. Really cool. And they're not the kind of sets LEGO would make now. It's difficult to put into words, but modern day LEGO is very sleek, intricately designed, and plays it very safe. And it's not hard to see why. What original LEGO IP could compete with the behemoths of LEGO Star Wars, LEGO Harry Potter, or LEGO Disney? And the few original IPs LEGO does have are multimedia. Dreams has a TV show, Monkey Kid a TV show and a comic, and Ninjago has a movie and somewhere north of 15 seasons of television. Pretty much every other original set is based on something that exists in real life. Architecture, sets, city vehicles, or animals. These days, there doesn't seem to be, pardon the pun, space for the weird, small sets of the 90s. So what changed? What was so great about these 90s sets? And why don't modern-day LEGO sets hit in quite the same way? I'm Eric Crittenden, and this is Clutch Power, a show about the ways we love LEGO. Episode 1, LEGO's Weird 90s Phase. First up, in Part 1, an interview with R.R. Slugger, YouTuber and retro LEGO lover. Then a bonus section, for Patreon supporters only, Slugger and I talk about mocks, my own creations, or custom LEGO models not built from a set. What exactly makes a mock LEGO-y? And what happens if you go too far in the opposite direction? And in Part 2, Slugger and I dive a little deeper into the psychology of modern LEGO. Thank you for joining me for today's episode of Clutch Power. Let's get started. Part 1. R.R. Slugger, lore keeper of all things 90s LEGO. There are many LEGO YouTubers, and a lot of them fall into one of a few categories: reacting to the latest, greatest LEGO sets, collecting LEGO minifigures, or lambasting LEGO at every opportunity. But today's guest has a very different vibe. His channel, R.R. Slugger, is dedicated to the weird, the forgotten, and the more LEGO-y side of LEGO. Slugger's interests and videos range from retrospectives on old themes, reviews of 90s LEGO sets, and a deep love of what we in the LEGO community called Old Gray. Yeah, we'll get to that. But first, some context. LEGO in the 90s was very different from the LEGO of today. There were few licenses, no botanicals, no collectible minifigs. The 90s started out simple. LEGO Castle with its knights and fortresses, LEGO Pirates with its ships and cannons, and LEGO Space was continuing on its trajectory. We were past the days of the simple astronauts, but the factions were pretty standard. Space Police were the good guys, Blacktron the bad guys. But then things started to get weird. The builds became stranger, less of your standard castle, pirates, and space affair. There were new factions in space and castle. LEGO started making very specialized one-off pieces that would only go in 1 or 2 sets. We saw more glow-in-the-dark bricks, more magnets, electric motors. Seriously, things were weird. You could never guess LEGO's next move. Like, have you heard of the theme Znap? It was super short-lived, but it was basically LEGO's answer to K'NEX. It did not work out well. Which kind of summed up LEGO in the 90s. Out-of-the-box ideas that never seemed to stick. So this is where it's helpful to have RR Slugger on the show, because, Slugger, you've explored so much of 90s LEGO, so I want to ask, what was LEGO's philosophy in the 90s?
To me, the 90s really seemed to be where LEGO was taking bigger risks. They were trying to do bigger, bolder things, especially if you compare it to the 80s. The 80s kind of feel like a natural evolution from what they were doing in the 70s. They just kind of expanded the ideas. You know, Castle was still a core thing. Pirates was still a very core thing. And they just kind of expanded outwards from there. Whereas the 90s to me feel a little bit more like radical, totally tubular, like that sort of thing, right? And the themes were becoming more bold and different and excessive in a way that we haven't really seen since or before, right? The amount of unique elements and gimmicks and play features in some of these sets is obscene, and it was costing the company greatly, and they didn't realize it as well too. There was some internal bookkeeping that was not being done, like sets like the Interstellar Starfighter, I think, from LEGO UFO. That's from 1997. Mm-hmm. It has a fiber optic system, a micromotor in there. It's got magnets. It's got heat-sensitive stickers, printing on every piece, like printing on all the figures. Like it's just to the nines, you know, in terms of what it can do. And apparently, according to Mark Stafford, years later, they were selling that set at a loss, and they didn't even realize it at the time. That there was just internal issues that were not allowing the company to succeed as a business. But as a creative venture, that's why I like the 90s. Like, I don't care if LEGO's making money or not. That doesn't concern me, you know?
Yeah, they're fine now.
Exactly, yeah, they're fine now.
With all the weird 90s themes, is there one that really, like, sticks out to you as your favorite?
Well, Rock Raiders, 1999. I gotta choose that one. But I do think UFO is the most emblematic of the 90s. It is, in my opinion, the theme that has the most immaculate printing, I think, in LEGO's history. They printed so many things, and the minifigures are all so unique. It really is just kind of the gold standard, in my opinion, of like the excess of the 90s. Kind of all wrapped into one theme.
What is so special about Rock Raiders?
For me, I mean, it's like a lot of that is I grew up with Rock Raiders. Most of the stuff I talk about on my channel is stuff that I've come to know as an adult. A lot of the sets that I talk about I never had as a kid. So I don't think there's a strong nostalgia bias or anything like that in the majority of things I talk about. But with Rock Raiders, it's what I had as a kid. It's it's near and dear to me. So that one is definitely rose tinted to the past there. But on top of that, like, Rock Raiders is a really fascinating LEGO theme, I think, because we know so much now about the development of it, much more than any other or most other LEGO themes, I should say. Rock Raiders was designed from the ground up, and it was the first LEGO theme designed this way to be a tie-in with a video game. So they were kind of taking the step into the digital age. So Lego Media International was working with DDI, Data Design Interactive, which was the digital publisher, I guess. They were the ones that were designing the game, and at the same time, Lego Futura, which is the design group internally at Lego, was making the toys, and they were in constant communication with each other, talking about, well, what if we did this, or let's do that. And a lot of the Rock Raiders stuff, like the lore and some of the characteristics of the characters, comes from DDI. It doesn't actually come from Lego itself. So, like the character of Chief, for example, was something dreamed up by DDI. The LMS Explorer, the big spaceship that the Rock Raiders travel on, was a DDI invention. It wasn't something invented by Lego. So I think there's something really cool to that. So Rock Raiders was like a big landmark thing. Like Lego wanted it to do gangbusters. You know, they wanted it to be a big property. I don't think the sales resulted in that, but Lego was also really quick to abandon their ideas in this era. Like after spending, years and so much money on R&D and all that for a toy, like a toy line like that, and then they'd put it out, and if it didn't do well immediately, they'd say, no, okay, we're not doing a second wave, we're just going to move on to a new idea and try again,
A few years ago, Lego made a big announcement. Lego Space was back. Nearly every original theme, from City to Friends to Duplo even, had at least one space set. A lot of fans were excited, but something was different. This was not the Lego Space they wanted. They wanted Blacktron. They wanted Insectoids. They wanted Imtron. In other words, they wanted Lego Space as it was in the 90s. What attracts you to this era of space?
For one, I love the differences in design and color palette between each year. Basically, every year they were doing a new thing in Lego Space. When you compare that to the 80s, they did have a couple of unique factions, but the majority of that decade is really just, okay, it's white and blue spaceships of some variety, right? So that's a big element for me. I also just love how abstract everything was and how like pulpy it kind of was, sci-fi pulp. It was very campy with a lot of their designs in the 90s.
Was there any storyline with space?
They would do those sorts of things in like the Lego magazines, very limited though, and with all Lego themes during that time period, you have to kind of pick and choose which canon you want to use, because a lot of it contradicts itself, and it's kind of unhelpful to try to contort it to all fit one narrative,
Is there a favorite of the space factions?
I mean, I'm of the opinion that Rock Raiders is the last one at the end there, 1999.
Okay.
They're space miners. They go in space and whatnot. But ignoring Rock Raiders, I think my favorite one might be Mtron, which is from 1990, so all the way at the start of the decade. And I was actually playing with some of the Mtron sets recently, and it was kind of really dawning on me that, like, wow, this is just kind of Rock Raiders before Rock Raiders. There's a really utilitarian look to the spacecraft in Mtron that is echoed later in Rock Raiders. So it's kind of a nice, like, bookend to the decade. You start with, a kind of industrial sort of space theme, and then you end with an industrial space theme.
What happened to... Because, when I was growing, I was really into Legos, like, the 2000s decade. I feel like Lego Space was not really as big a deal. What happened? What changed?
Lego Star Wars is a big reason for this, right? That they've got a new property, and according to Christian Faber, if we take his word as gospel, he said that the deal that Lego made with Lucasfilm involved not doing original IPs inside or outside the solar system, I think is the way he phrased it.
Okay.
So if Lego was going to do space, it had to be NASA inspired, essentially, which is why we had 20 years of NASA space pretty much exclusively. But the other thing too, I think, like, even without Lego Star Wars, I think Lego Space was burning itself out. They were turning over ideas and projects like so quickly. Like I mentioned, it was like one wave and then they just start something new. One wave and they start something new. Even with like Rock Raiders or Life on Mars, that's another great example. That was in 2001. They poured so much money into the marketing. Like Life on Mars was everywhere in that year, I remember. But here it was just one wave of sets and that's it, and then they just shrug their shoulders and move on. It's kind of crazy to think about, like how much effort they put into these ideas and then they didn't stick around to flesh them out.
Yeah, I mean, and you talk about Life on Mars, like the custom molds and like the tubing and like all of that.
Yeah, very very similar to Rock Raiders in that respect, I think. Yeah,
it's just crazy. Around 2004, there was a pretty big shift in LEGO. 2004 was LEGO's worst financial year in history. They lost roughly $320 million in 2004, which was almost double what they lost in 2003. Things were bad, and then, over the next few years, things got better. And it's not really a secret why, it's thanks mostly to licenses. LEGO Indiana Jones, LEGO Harry Potter, LEGO Star Wars. And since then, they've followed the money. Hey, would you do anything different? But there was definitely a shift, and it started around 2004. Let's talk about the shift, because I love the way you put it in one of your videos, like the 2003, 2004, with the different grays. And I kind of want to walk through each of the points that you brought up. So kind of what changed there?
There's so much internal restructuring at the company. Like everything was changing. By 2003, I think LEGO Star Wars had been successful enough to kind of show the LEGO group that like this is the future. This is the way to do this. I imagine, and I don't have any numbers here, but I imagine LEGO Star Wars in its first first 4 years, I guess, probably outsold all of LEGO Space in the 90s. I think they probably just sold more, Star Wars sets than they ever did with LEGO Space. So I think that kind of made it clear that, to them, like, well, we should just stop making our own space themes if we can just, use Star Wars and make money that way. And now, of course, Star Wars is a huge factor in what LEGO does year to year.
Yeah, and you also saw, I'm just thinking, what were the yellow skin tone license sets? There was Harry Potter.
Yeah, Harry Potter. I guess that was another early IP as well, too, which is still going strong with LEGO. So they chose a couple of strong intellectual properties there.
And that was also right around when they shifted to flesh color.
Yeah. So that would have been in 2004. So there were a few figures that still had yellow, flesh tone, and then they switched it over. Some of those sets I know released with Lego, with yellow Lego figures, and then midway through the year were updated to have flesh tone figures. So like it was a really shifting dynamic there.
Yeah, you also mentioned brick-based construction versus plate-based construction.
Yeah. So this is the idea of the granulization, I suppose, of Lego over time. The pieces have just become smaller and smaller and smaller, and it's gotten to the point now where your average Lego set that you open up, like let's say like a $30 or $40 set, something like that, will contain much more plate sized pieces than it will contain brick sized pieces. And that's not true of, Lego sets from the 90s or the 80s, or, you go back further and further, where the brick seemed to be like the lowest common denominator in older Lego sets, and now the plate is the lowest common denominator in newer Lego sets. So it's just a slow shrinkage of the pieces themselves.
You also mentioned the color scheme, and I don't know how much that ties into Lego's philosophy, but I think it is worth talking about.
Yeah, the big general color shift or color purge, I suppose, in from 2003, 2004. It extended a little bit further, like it started in 2004, but some of the colors didn't shift until 2006 or 2007. So it took some time to phase out some of that stuff, but that to me is the most outwardly visually apparent change in Lego. And I think it's worth mentioning because it shows us a visual indicator of this change. Like the other factors you already mentioned, the licensing and the brick to plate based construction, like those all took time, and they all kind of owe their origins to this shift that happened, but we wouldn't see the effects of that for years later. But this is the one where you can actually see the effects immediately. Starting in 2004, all new grays, so new light gray, new dark gray, and then I think in 2006 is when brown was replaced as well too. So that one shifted. Yeah. In addition, like a lot of Lego colors were just abandoned during this time period as well too. They wanted to strip down the palette to make it more concise, and I can totally understand why. There were just so many extraneous colors.
And the last point you raised between 2003 and 2004 was risk-taking versus adhering to what works.
I don't think that's even one that would be contestable. I think most Lego fans, even if you prefer the stuff that happened after 2004, I think most people would agree it was much safer, more formulaic compared to what they did in the 90s. Like, I mean, like you only need to point at things like Galador and all these wacky Lego space themes from the 90s to like prove the point. It's like,
Well, and even the new themes, the original IPs that come out today are like, they don't do well.
Honestly, Lego Dreams has been doing really well too. I mean, they've stuck with it, right? Like we're on wave 4 of it or something like that. Like, I mean, it depends on what metric we're trying to like apply here, but compared to any of the themes from the 90s, like Dreams is doing way better if it's getting a second, a third, a fourth wave, like
Yeah, but there's so many, like if you go to the Lego store, I feel like easily 70-80% of it is licensed now.
Oh yeah
And it's just what sells. I get, I don't fault them for it. I would do the same thing.
Like it is a giant business, the most profitable toy brand in the world, and they're making billions of dollars every year. But at the same time, just because they're making more money and they're more financially successful doesn't mean I like the toy more, right? Like it's a completely detached element for me. Frankly, I don't care if Lego makes money. I want them to take more risks and do more interesting creative things. I consider the creative golden age of Lego to be right around the end of the 90s, early 2000s, where they were trying all these new things, seeing what would work. Like Galador is a great example of that. It's a product of that, like we're just going to try things sort of era of Lego. And that to me is just much more interesting than a safe, successful product.
Next up, for patrons, Slugger and I talk about custom builds and how something can feel Lego-y. For everyone else, we'll go right to part 2, another shift in Lego's philosophy. And we talk about Lego's philosophy in the modern era. Part 2, Lego's modern philosophy. Lego saw another shift around 2004, but this one was more subtle. You might not have even recognized it. I sure didn't, not until I watched one of Slugger's videos where he named it Conflict in a Box. I want to talk about conflict in a box.
Sure, yeah.
What is that?
As far as I know, I think it's a term coined by Nick on Planet Ripple from the Lego Rewind series. I think he was the first one to mention this. At least this is the first time I was exposed to it. But basically, as he describes it, midway through the 2000s and certainly into the 2010s, Lego really shifted their focus of their design philosophy, let's say, where previously, if you bought a set, usually it just was the set. Like Rock Raiders as an example, if I bought the granite grinder, I got the granite grinder. I didn't get the granite grinder and then like a little side vehicle or something that the rock monsters would use to fight the granite grinder. Like that sort of thing. So that's kind of what happened later on. Like you see it in themes like Vikings or Agents or Atlantis, all these series that have conflict in a box. Oh, Mars Mission is a great example of that, where you're no longer getting like the set, you're getting the set and something else with it. And on the surface, I think that appears like to be a benefit because you're getting more, right? I'm getting more. I'm getting two things out of this. In reality, that's not how Lego sets are designed. They're designed with a parts budget in mind, mandated from the beginning, a price point mandated, and then they have to design something with X number of parts, essentially. And what ends up happening is they siphon pieces off from the main model to make a side model. The reason why this doesn't appeal to me is because now I'm paying the same amount of money for what I would say is less, because the main build is weaker than it could have been had they taken the 20% of pieces on the side build and added that to the main model. And I think it's sometimes it's really clear as day. I think Mars Mission is a great example of that, where you look at some of those main builds and you're like, oh my goodness, like why didn't they make this better? And the reason why is because they had to add the conflict into the box.
Yeah. What I also think could kind of fall under that umbrella is, like, you look at, for example, the UFO sets. It doesn't include any bad guys. It's hard to say what I would want as a kid. I think it's easy to look back as an adult and say, oh, maybe I wish they didn't have conflict, because it could, kind of stagnate their creativity when you kind of lock them into this guy versus this guy.
Kids will be kids. Like, I mean, like the idea that that adding conflict or not adding conflict is good or bad, I think doesn't really play out in reality, because like kids, if they want to make their toys fight each other, they'll make their toys fight each other, like they always have, like throughout all of human history, right? So I do get your point about limiting the creativity, though, and I think that is a strong point, because many sets that have or that feature conflict in a box make it very clear who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. But if we look back at some, like, in my opinion, one of the best themes to do this is Lego Adventurers, where they would often have side builds and smaller, like the bad guys would come in on a plane or something while the adventurers are on a truck. But because they designed the sets in a way where they weren't like hyper stylized or anything, you could just as easily put the good guys in the plane and put the bad guys in the truck, right? The side builds were interchangeable. There weren't assigned a faction beyond like maybe some slight coloring differences here or there, but you could just as easily pop Johnny Thunder into the bad guy's vehicle if you wanted and play with it that way.
I think of Orient Expedition. A lot of those sets are not really good guys versus bad guys. It's more like humans versus beasts, for lack of a better word. Yeah. But you can't put a Mars Mission astronaut in the alien ship.
Correct. Yeah. And that's the difference.
Yeah. Why that shift in philosophy?
I think it probably had to do with like market research they were doing at the time, where they wanted to capitalize on the idea that some kids would only get one Lego set for their birthday or something like that. And I mean, that's a really common thing, more common than not. And they want to make the most playable experience possible for those kids that would only get one toy for Christmas. And so I think that the goals are altruistic in that sense, that just trying to make the best toy possible. It doesn't appeal to me as much. And I often find those little side builds are just kind of junk at the end of the day, and like they just start to collect. You get a bunch of them and you're like, well, what am I going to do with all these? Like, do I take them apart? They're not even like that useful in terms of their pieces. I just kind of wish these pieces were used in the main build to make the main build better, because the main build's got problems in it.
Yeah, it definitely feels like leftovers.
Yeah, leftovers. Exactly.
Like I said earlier, it's easy to talk about this stuff as an adult without the perspective of a kid. But Slugger actually knows what he's talking about. Away from YouTube, he's a teacher, and he works with kids from ages 5 up to 15. He sees firsthand what kids are taking away from Lego, much more than your average adult fan of Lego sees. Do you like talk to them about Lego?
Sometimes. I think the cutest interaction I ever had with a student about the topic of Lego was one of my students. She was telling me about a Lego bunny set that she had. Like, she said you could build the bunny, but you could also take it apart and build like a baby seal.
Okay.
Yeah. This set came out a few years ago, and she said, and it's the perfect size that you can give it a hug. And I was like, oh, my heart. So cute.
Have you noticed any changes between when we were kids versus kids now, like how they play?
Definitely how technology has influenced their lives, right? Because I was 18 before I ever had a cell phone, and these kids are much younger when they're getting into that sort of technology, and I think it has like a maturing effect on them. Like the kids now, they seem to act more mature than I remember acting as a kid. I don't think they're maybe allowed to be a kid as long as we were. Yeah, but I mean, these are generalizations.
Well, what I think is interesting about that point, there was and is this growing population of adults in kids spaces.
Yeah.
Lego, like Disney World, Roblox, or Fortnite. Maybe that's why kids seem more mature, is because they are interacting so much more with adults, even in like the ways they play.
That's an interesting point. Yeah. And honestly, it is one of the interesting elements of like Western culture is how little generational overlap we see in like, how interaction is. Like there are so many adults out there that go their whole day or their whole week without interacting with a kid, and that's really strange if we look at the whole globe, because like the cultures in other countries and whatnot have much more overlap between the generations, but I think what you're kind of speaking to is that like the kids that grew up in those kid spaces continue to, go back to those kid spaces as adults now, right? So it's almost like we need to create more kid spaces again, like new kid spaces for the next generation of kids, because these kid spaces are now adult focused, and when there's an adult's heavy clientele, I suppose, the business, if we take Lego for example, has to then start catering to the adults in its space, and it's almost like an Ouroboros, like a snake eating its own tail at that point, because you have to keep getting kids in, otherwise like there's an end, it's an end point to how big that can grow.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, it would be short-sighted to only go after the adults, because adults die.
yeah, absolutely.
But it is tough, right? Because a business follows the money. So, I don't know how many kids will own the $1,000 Death Star set. Probably not many.
Yeah. Lego, in a lot of respects, has my respect, I should say, because they could lean into the nostalgia pandering much more than they do. Like they do the odd, Blacktron remake set or whatever to kind of appeal to older space fans. But they could do that. They could just reprint old sets. It's totally within their capacity to do that. And I think that would be a complete game over for Lego as a brand if they started doing that, because that's finally throwing in the towel, saying like, we don't have new ideas. We're not going to get more kids into it. We're just going to appeal to the adults that played with it as a kid and try to milk them as much as we can before the company tanks, So the fact that they're not doing that shows that they have forethought, I think.
To play devil's advocate slightly,
sure,
I could argue that the reason they aren't doing that is because the licensed nostalgic crowd is much more profitable.
That's an interesting point. You might honestly be right with what you're saying there. I hadn't considered that. I sometimes get into that discussion when talking about gift with purchase sets. I've had a couple of videos where I've talked about the GWPs and whatnot, And some folks have pushed back. Well, I mean, a lot of folks push back, but some folks have raised the point, like saying that, well, Lego could make money if they still, if they did the gift with purchase and they still allowed you to purchase it. Like, they could still make money doing that. I'm like, yes, they could, but they will make more money if they lock it behind a bigger paywall, which is what they're doing. So, yeah, sometimes the answer is what would make more money.
Right, yeah. Look, it's easy to lambast nostalgia, but it is so lucrative. I'm a victim of it. I'm sure we all are. Look, whenever Lego releases a Lord of the Rings set, I buy it. I tilt my head and let them drive their fangs directly into my nostalgia. But I'm also nostalgic for certain aspects of Lego. Certain sets from my childhood, certain minifigs, certain colors. They fill me with this soft emptiness that I want to fill. Nothing exemplifies that more than the colors sand red and sand purple. These are two short-lived colors Lego introduced in the early 2000s, and they're these delicious, dusty shades that only come in a handful of pieces. If you have any of these pieces, count yourself lucky. Those are my favorite two Lego colors, and they're two colors Lego doesn't make anymore. Slugger's favorite color is also no longer produced by Lego. You heard about it earlier in the show. Old dark gray. In 2004, during that seismic shift, Lego introduced what is now called dark bluish gray. It's what it sounds like, gray with a little bit of blue in it. The old dark gray, by comparison, looks very yellow and a little dirty. But it's exactly those qualities that attract Slugger.
I love old dark gray. And I use it all the time when I build things. I try to collect as much of it as I can. And it's such an interesting Lego color because the color itself is really old. I think like 1978, like 76 was when it was introduced. But it wasn't introduced in brick form until the end of the 90s. It basically only existed as Lego tools or certain, chain pieces. Yeah, like the Lego pickaxe, like those sorts of things, shovels. Yeah, like you find those in the old dark gray for 20 years before the brick was introduced. And it wasn't really until like Lego Insectoids, like 1998, when you actually started to see dark gray used as a brick. And then Rock Raiders used it, of course. And then it was gone by 2003. So, like, the color only existed as like as a viable element for 5 years. And that to me is so interesting. It's fascinating.
Do you have any affinity for the old light gray?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that one too. But that one, to me, the change to new light gray is so minor that I can accept new light gray as a complete substitute. Like that's fine. That's all well and good. I slightly prefer the old light gray, but I like the new light gray too. The new dark gray has a whole new character though, right? Because the grittiness of the old dark gray, that kind of grungy look to it, I just adore it. And there are Lego sets now, modern Lego sets, that I think would look better with the old dark gray. And I think one great example is the crocodile locomotive that they did a few years back. Kind of like it's got the brown kind of color to it, kind of rusted look. And I just think the old dark gray for the undercarriage would have looked so much nicer.
Thanks a million to Slugger for talking with me for this episode. Go check out his YouTube channel, RR Slugger. His videos are unique, interesting, and a ton of fun, even if you don't have any nostalgia for these older sets. If you want to take your support to the next level, please become a patron. You'll get extra content for every episode, along with a digital Lego mock built specifically for that episode. For this episode, you'll get a portrait of RR Slugger himself with a tribute to 90s space. You can see the mock on my socials. And that's the episode. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into 90s Lego. I hope you learned something. Maybe you have more of an affinity for the underloved and the weird. Want to support the show? Share it by word of mouth. Tell a friend. Tell your online Lego peers. And of course, following the podcast everywhere is a huge help. It's the same handle everywhere, clutchpower.pod. Have a good night and stay connected.